So now we're back for the continuation of the vision topic.
Yep.
So today we're going to be talking about how you sort of developed your beliefs on vision, and then how do you build a company's vision.
Yeah.
So let's get to it.
All right. So what was the first one? Beliefs?
Yeah, how did you form your beliefs around vision and the philosophy around that?
Yeah. Whether it deserves first place or not in the sort of etymology, I think Built to Last, the book by, back then I think it was called Porras and Collins, even though Jim's become much more famous than Porras, was instrumental for me. My recollection is that I got that book right when it first came out, which has to be late 80s, maybe like 89, 90. Obviously, we can go fact check it. If Joe Rogan's fact checked over here, he could check it for us. But
pull it up, Jamie.
there you go, exactly. But that book really hammered home on a bunch of things for me that I kind of intuitively had begun to, think about or develop frameworks for in my head. Because this is, let's just say it's 1990. So I started, with the bank in 82, did the 14 months of training. There's a lot of things that they teach you in the training program, but mostly around, it was around, accounting and economics and things like that. But then obviously I went in and went in on my first real job with the bank was workouts, and so I started to see what happens when companies are poorly run, as we've talked about before. And then from there I went and helped start a lower middle market oriented lending and investment platform at the bank. And then I started sort of get into the art and science of business building. But I would say that whole journey was sort of like, it was not a structured class on vision. It was not a structured class on company building. It was, just sort of figure this stuff out on your own. And so, during those initial years of lending to and investing in businesses, I started to develop some perspectives. And then along comes Built to Last, and it's like, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. That book had a profound impact on me. And, I actually have not read it in decades. I should go back and read it again. I know I've skimmed it because as I think I write all over these bloody books. And I have that copy with all my writing in from 1990. But the whole idea of clock building, of playing an infinite game, I think in that book, they certainly talks about BHAGs. I think that it was in the book. Core Values and Culture was in that book. And I even believe some version of Purpose, Passion, Just Cause is in that book. Should have it right with us. But I think a lot of the vision stuff and the importance of it was first brought out in a framed, effective way by Built to Last. And then, started doing what, I'm apt to do, which is then going down each of those little rabbit holes, right, on culture, on Purpose, Passion, Just Cause, on BHAGs, on the idea of clock building, right, which big idea there is, right, building a company, right, taking that long game and trying to, be really thoughtful about creating a business that will endure for decades and decades and decades. So I would say, my belief system, as you put it, my framework for thinking about vision, I have to give Built to Last, number one spot in terms of credit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have not read the book.
Yeah, you should. You'd probably find. Well, I know somehow or another you should figure out how to access what the book is all about, because I know that reading
yeah.
is not your favorite thing.
Well, I should at least read a summary about it. If not read the, I mean, I can read.
Yeah, but it'd be interesting. There's so many different things we could do here, but it would be almost interesting. Not almost interesting. I think could be pretty interesting to go through each chapter. I don't have that book with me. It's actually at the farm. But to go through each chapter and talk about what they had written about from the perspective of today, knowing everything we know, because like I say, that's 30 years ago now, 32 years ago.
Yeah,
and I bet you most of it stands the test of time.
Probably, and then there's more to build off of those things, right? Things we figured out.
Well, it's like I remember. So one of the big ideas behind Built to Last was they took the exemplar companies in well-defined industries, and then they compared it to that exemplar company to the other company that was also well known in the industry. And if you had invested in the exemplar company as opposed to the also ran, you would make like 10,000 times more money. I mean, and I'm probably exaggerating, but it was a big bloody number. And then they had, they said these are the characteristics of the exemplars, and these are, the characteristics of the companies that are not exemplars. And Disney, as an example, I clearly remember this was an exemplar. But then later on, I don't remember if it was Collins or others pointing out that Disney kind of lost its way, because Disney was always about making people happy. But then you go and acquire ABC as an example, and the nightly news, is that making you happy? Right, and so that's a good example, and there are other examples of those companies that it would be really interesting to look back on them, those who are no longer the exemplars but were on that list, and say, hey, why do we think they're no longer exemplars? I mean, Disney, we've just talked about why I think it's had its fair share of issues. And I won't go into the politics on Disney, right? But if you're generally about, this is my ideal client, and we're here to make you happy, we're here to entertain your family, right? We're here to provide stuff that is good for you all, as opposed to leaning into the negative stuff, right? Which Disney obviously did a little bit of, right? Those are examples of where a company had a very clear point of view about who it is, what its ideal customer is, what its just cause is, or passion or purpose is, and and all of a sudden you have a CEO who goes in a direction that's not really consistent, and as we've talked about before, what happens when you go off script, for lack of a better term. Whether it's your core values, or it's your purpose, passion, just cause, or your ideal client, you had a bunch of people, right, that joined you because this is who you are, right? And those people, they could be your customers, they could be your employees, they could be strategic partners, right? But they joined you because this is who you are, and they believed in what you're doing. And now all of a sudden you go off script, and it's like, well, that's not what I signed up for, right? And then you can go off, and I think we talked about this last time in part one. Then all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I'm hurting trust, right? Character-wise, I said I was this, now I'm acting like this. Competency-wise, I said I was really good at this stuff, and now I'm saying I'm really good at this stuff. And then connections-wise, right? I said these are the values that were important, right? These are the goals. These are my interests. It's my purpose, passion, just cause. And now I'm going this direction. So all of a sudden, you're violating some form of trust with one or more of your ideal stakeholders, and that's usually going to cause some issues.
Yeah, because if you start trying to play a different game, but you still claim, you have that facade of like, oh no, we're still this company. We still have these values. And these are our beliefs and everything. And then you behind the scenes are doing a bunch of things that clearly do not live up to that and indicate that you're not playing that game,
Right.
that's never right. That will not be built to last.
Right. And then we, you go down some of these paths where people, because of the intensity of politics these days, right? Where you can't help but step on some sticky stuff, right? When you talk about this stuff. But it's the Bud Light thing, right? It's like, are don't make fun of, or worse, your ideal customer, right? It's just got to be, right? Just, don't get lost, right? And denigrating your customer, which they did. I mean, come on, let's not, right? They did. And maybe not with the commercials themselves, right? But I would say the way they defended themselves after the commercials came out, or some of the interviews with the marketing human that basically said, we can't be. I forget what it was, but they were bad mouthing a portion of their customer base, and it's like, no, right? Just there's positive ways, right, to go about things. It's like we always talk about truthful, specific, and positive, right? Just let's be a little more thoughtful about how we say things, and let's do it. Let's really try hard. And we're all guilty of saying things we regret saying, right? We're all guilty of not thinking things through as much as we should have in hindsight. And so that's just to be a human. But, once you have your vision, and once you've been working on it, like we'll talk about ideal customers again, once you've been working on it over and over and over again and developing these high trust relationships with them, yeah, you can have interesting conversations, but there's nothing, it's why we talk about feed forward as opposed to feedback. Feedback is, you're stupid, right? Or you did something stupid, as opposed to, hey, if we thought about that a little bit more, do you think we would have done that? Or another version is, what would have to be true for us to have not done that? Or, some form of positive, constructive, let's make ourselves better, not try to actually make ourselves worse conversation, right? So just being thoughtful, really focused on, sort of who you are and what's important to you, engaging in a positive, constructive manner. Back to the whole vision thing, I think, staying consistent and evolving feels like people make it harder than it should be.
Because people are trying to control the perception of it rather than control it from inside and really sort themselves out and understand themselves so that they behave in a way that is in alignment with what they believe.
Yeah.
And that's a lot harder to do and requires a lot more self-awareness, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And also when you act that way and you screw up, people are very willing to forgive you for your mistakes.
If it's genuine.
Because it's authentic and it's genuine.
Yeah.
And everyone understands that people make mistakes.
Yeah.
But if you do something, you make a decision, you take repeated actions to go against what you say you believe, then that's just a red flag.
Yeah. But going back to the point here, right? Back to built to last, and I think the basic concepts for the most part, and I do want to do another podcast on this in terms of the book itself. I think they really have stood the test of time, and I think people, CEOs in particular, need to think about going. I use the phrase off script, right? It's like, no, right? It's worked for decades and decades. It's like Chesterton's fence. We've talked about that before, I think, on the podcast, right? Don't tear things down that have stood for a long period of time, right? Understand why they're there. And if they no longer make sense, then 100%, right? Let's get rid of things. But if your core values, if your ICP, if your purpose, passion, just cause has worked for decades, be careful if you're going to get rid of something or change it, because you've got all these people who have a strong relationship with you because of who you are and who you have been. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so, right, that leads us very well into next idea of how do you take these difficult concepts or timeless things that we talked about previously,
Right.
and build them and integrate them into the company.
Yeah. So how do you build a vision?
Yes.
Right. So, I love my friends at EOS, right? But this is an area where I have a slightly different perspective than they do. I believe that, well, we've talked about before, there are 5 types of, the 5 archetypes, and we talked about in the last episode, right? They're all going to approach vision differently, right? But I'm gonna talk about vision specifically from the perspective of either a visionary or a legacy type archetype, right? So if you have a visionary founder who genuinely has this perspective about where the world's going and where it's going to be in 5 to 10 years, I believe that founder should go take advantage of something like our Vision Builders Workbook as an example. And they should go off into the mountains or to the ocean. I don't care. Someplace where you can see the grandeur.
The metaphorical mountains.
The metaphorical mountains, right? And they should write down their thoughts on the core components of a vision, right? The core values, the purpose, passion, just cause, the ideal client, the unique value proposition, right? The big, hairy, audacious goals, the sort of the classic stuff we put under the visionary category, plus also, right, where they think the company's going to be in 3 years and 1 year, and really what they think we should be thinking about over the next 90 days. They should go off and do that work because it's in their brain, right? And the vast majority of it. They may not have framed it and thought of it the way that we can help them think about it, but a lot of that stuff's already there. And then they should get that reasonably well framed up, written down, and then bring it back to their senior leadership team and say, hey, this is what I've been thinking about. I've now done some real work in terms of putting it into words so we can really see it and talk about it. And then they should talk about it and hopefully get everybody on the senior leadership team on the same page. And even there, quick drill down, I would say everybody that they genuinely believe should be on the senior leadership team and will be on the senior leadership team in a year or two, right? Because obviously if there's someone on the senior leadership team that really doesn't buy what he believes, because that happens, right? Especially if it hasn't been articulated yet as thoughtfully as we're prescribing, then what you want to get to is you want to get the whole senior leadership team on the same page, in agreement, because now all of a sudden everybody's on the same page and we have what we call these focus filters. And now, is this consistent with our core values? Is this consistent with our ideal client? Is this consistent with our unique value proposition? Does this all, is it all congruent with our purpose, passion, just cause? Does this big, hairy, audacious goal or compelling, audacious goal or 10-year target, as EOS would call it, does this resonate? Should we be marching towards this? And if yes, where should we be in 3 years? If that's, now we're all aligned there. Okay, so what do we need to do over the next year? Awesome, now we're all aligned there. What do we need to do over the next 90 days, right? What are the priorities? And so I believe that for visionary archetypes and for legacy archetypes, they should present it and have it debated, and then ultimately, right, hopefully get everybody on the same page. I think that you move into the other archetypes and they may not have as strong of an opinion. And if that's true, then the traditional EOS approach, which is you bring the senior leadership team in, you get it facilitated, and you collectively get on the same page. That could be a really good, healthy exercise. I would say the same thing for an accidental entrepreneur, right? So they don't have this stuff, so let's help them and help the whole team get on the same page. And then the last category is the opportunistic one. And I don't know if they're truly opportunistic, they're probably not going to want to even care about this stuff. And so maybe we don't even really worry about that particular type at this moment in time. So, but, I don't think one size fits all process-wise. I do think that if I were a visionary, and I am a visionary entrepreneur, I feel pretty strongly about this stuff. And so, I want to debate it with you all, but I want to present it as opposed to sit here and think that we're just group committing the vision. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, well, you can't create a vision by committee.
I think it's really hard.
I don't think you can, because you got to have one person that's sort of the director of the thing, and it creates that essence, that purpose, passion, just cause from their why or whatever, right? And if you try to get a bunch of people to have their opinions on it, and you're just sort of aggregating all these other things, and then you're not really going to understand whatever is built from that. You're not really going to understand why it became that way.
Right.
So there's no real source of truth.
Yeah.
And it's also just not going to be as resonant, because you look at any, right? Because it is a creative idea.
Right.
Right. It's creative. It's like art or anything like that. And how many
great pieces of art were created by committee?
Yeah. You think of examples where it's like two people, like brothers or something? I'm struggling to think of.
But even then, right? If we go to so, and this is horrible, right? My bad rote memory, right? But you go to the visionary integrator pairs of the famous ones, right? And you had Henry Ford and his person. You had Walt Disney and his brother. There's a bunch of them, right? Right off the top of my head, I'm not going to go there. But one of them was the visionary, right? And then the other one was super good at helping that vision come into reality. So I don't even think, when you think about these pairs coming along, that there's a visionary pair that we're really, maybe there is, right? But
I was just thinking in terms of like film, Coen brothers. That's all I could, in going through the list of film, literature, art, sculpture, architecture. Right. It's like I got the Coen brothers is the only thing I could think of in terms of directors.
And we should interview them. Say, hey, guys.
And maybe one of them, I know that it's directed by the Coen brothers. I don't know if one of them is the more visionary type and the other.
But somehow or another, they're dividing and conquering.
Yeah.
Right. It's almost assured, because otherwise, if they both were vision, there's no way they'd have the same vision.
Yeah.
Right. So it's an interesting conversation.
Yeah. But the fact that we can only think of one really makes that.
Now I know I'm going to get slings and arrows from my friends at EOS, but I love you all. But I mean, it's because you and I've been talking lately about great brands, right? And just greatness. How there's just this coherence. And, whether it's a film or whether, I as you know, I use the book Great Gatsby, because to me, I'm pretty sure that it's got to be in the top 10 of every single sentence was so thought out and purposeful, right? And so there's just this was 156 pages or something, like just this unbelievably well-structured book. And then, of course, art, and then the movies. I know you're a huge fan of the Dune director. What's his name again?
Denis Villeneuve.
Denis
Villeneuve.
Right?
Sure.
Something close to that. And just how meticulous he is in just putting the whole thing together. And Christopher Nolan, right? How amazing people like this are, and Michelangelo, and just like they have this so coherent mass. It's just like it's all these things, and great art, paintings wise, right? You look at it, there's no weird like committee moment in this art.
No.
Yeah, and it's the same thing for a great brand, right?
Yeah. And it's just making sure that everything, every brush stroke and every word that's written on the page is in service of that vision.
Yeah.
And in alignment with that. And right, we like to make that as explicit as possible. But to some extent, on the big picture, it's a intuitive, subconscious force that creates these things, and that's why we haven't really seen AI be able to replicate that very well.
Right.
It's just an aggregation of all these things, and it does an amazing job at that.
Right.
But in terms of having that unique, creative perspective of connecting a lot of things and then internalizing it and expressing it, that's really, really difficult to do.
Yeah. And coherence, not the right term, right? But it's that everything makes sense, and some of it you can't even explain, you can't articulate particularly well, right? But the whole thing is whole.
Yeah. Well, you just look at it and you're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because everything, right? Your brain is thinking about this or subconsciously a lot more than you realize. And
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, everything, this all looks like it's from the same thing.
Yeah.
And so that generates trust.
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Because ultimately it's whole and it's authentic, right? And so it's like, some of the tension we have even with our own company is people don't understand why some things matter as much as I think they do, right? Whether it's on being really on brand, or whether it's what we teach, there are things that you're like, yes, that's who we are, that's what we believe, that's what makes sense. And then there are things like where a committee comes along and they're like, they put this thing together, and you're like, but that's not us.
Yeah. And, for a lot of startups and companies that are growing, you get away with a lot of like, oh, this guy just gets it.
Right.
Someone comes in and like, they just get it, so we're good.
Yeah.
But at some point, which seems like consistently after some like 75,
right,
that just starts to become really difficult to do.
Yeah, because you move from being, and we write about
implicit.
This, right? You can get away with implicit understandings early on, and you can get away with that not just internally, but early on you can get away with putting stuff out into the world that may or may not be like perfect, and we're not talking about perfect. We're just like 90% or 95% strong.
Well, at least aligned, right?
Yeah, because instead of having right today we have 12,000 customers running on 90, so right, and hundreds of thousands of people that are on our email list, and so right, you mess up with an email and it hits 200,000 people, that's a different thing than you mess up with an email that's gone to 50 people. So that just the stakes are so much higher. And I know that we're transitioning right now from departments that report to me to a C-suite, and there's tension within the organization because the transition is, people love the way it was, right? That's natural, right? We don't want to change. But now it's super important that we take that next step, and everything we do continues to be consistent, and we scale, and people understand why we're doing the things we do. And we're not saying one thing and then doing another thing, because that harms our credibility, and credibility is part of trust.
Yeah. And in order to make it make sense on the outside, you have to make it, right, the things that are resonant and coherent inside need to be made explicit.
Yeah, more and more explicit the bigger you get. You have no choice.
You can try it, and there's a lot of big companies out there that don't do a good job of that, but they will not be built to last.
No, and it's like there's something going on. I just read about it today, and don't want to, right? You'd love for these conversations to stand the test of time. But I read about some of the changes that are being made at Bayer, AB, right, the German company, and they're going to this, right? They're kind of blowing up hierarchy, and they're having all these like thousands of teams going out there and doing stuff. It's like, how's that going to scale? Are we going to, is there going to be a brand issue? As I was reading it, I'm going, it's like, okay, so we got to the point where things are so messed up, we're willing to just risk the whole I don't know, but I'm cynical that what this guy is doing is going to work, but
Yeah. So on
the
that
gift
note,
that keeps giving.
I think we've gone over our time,
All right.
and I thought this was going to be a shorter one, but a good discussion.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of we could keep going on this. I'm sure we'll do another one and we'll do more episodes on Built to Last.
I'd love to do that. That'd be super cool.
Yes.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.